Wonderful. Thank you. Um, Thank you all for joining us this evening. I am grateful for this opportunity to share with you the recommendations that are included in the first draft of the 24-25 or 2024-25 enrollment proposal for our school district. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about recommendations for the Northwestern area. If there is time toward the end of the session and you have questions about other areas, we'll be happy to answer those. But the primary focus for today's session is on those that impact the Northwestern area. To provide some context, on September 19th, staff members presented the first draft of the new student enrollment proposal to the Board of Education. This first draft includes proposed school assignment changes for the 2024-25 school year. The proposal includes a recommendation for the base attendance area for the new Woods Creek Elementary, which will be discussed at a different session, which is scheduled to open in July 2024, along with associated middle school changes to align the feeder pattern for this school. In addition, this year's student assignment proposal includes base assignment changes, many of which we'll discuss today, calendar application changes, and some recommended stability rules in order to relieve our capped and overcrowded schools, as well as to fully utilize our underutilized schools. These changes will provide an opportunity for students to attend a less crowded school, and in most cases, to have a more efficient bus route. In addition, the board will also discuss options that allow families affected by the proposal the opportunity to apply for a stability transfer and remain at their current school without district transportation. Again, the purpose of today's session is to share information related to recommendations impacting the Northwestern area of the county. In addition, we will take time to address any questions that you may have related to these recommendations. Your feedback will be used as the second draft of the proposal is prepared, and the second draft is scheduled to be presented to the school board on at their October 17th work session. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. Before we begin, let me go over some logistics. I've noticed that a handful of people have raised a hand and might already have a question, so I want to be able to give you a place to put those questions. Our session will last for no more than an hour and a half. We will begin with our presentation and then conclude by responding to the questions from today's session. Throughout the session, if you have questions regarding the proposal or the recommended stability rules or suggestions for staff to consider, please post them to our thought exchange. We will use the term session or hashtag session1 to be able to identify questions that are being posted live in today's session as opposed to questions or comments that were posted previously. We do recommend that you post to the thought exchange for a couple of reasons. One, we'll monitor that throughout today's session and be able to answer those questions toward the end of our session today. And two, this is the one dedicated public comment tool in which all school board members will be able to see the comments and questions that are posted. In addition, staff will be able to compile these results on behalf of the board. We will make every effort to address all questions that are posed today. In addition, if you'd prefer to ask a more personal question, we have enabled the Q&A feature for today's session. So if you'll look at the bottom right of your screen, you'll see this circled insignia that's a sort of a triangle, a square, and a circle. If you'll click on that, it'll open up another tab for you where you can click on Q&A. If you're using a mobile device, you'll probably want to click on the three dots and then find the three shapes. And then what you're looking for is the Q&A feature. So again, you have two ways to post questions for today. One would be to put them into the thought exchange. Again, that is the public comment tool for the entire first draft. And it is the one and only place where all board members will be able to see your questions, comments, suggestions, and ideas. However, if you do want to use the Q&A feature while we're here in today's session, you can use that. We will keep all of your questions confidential and we'll answer them toward the end of today's session. So you will only need to post your question once if it's the same question. I'll give everyone a moment to look at this again. This particular screen I will repost several times throughout today's session. That way, if you're not quite ready to post a question now and you don't really want to log into the thought exchange, or later on you do have a question and you're not sure how to use the Q&A feature, this slide I'll represent a couple of times to help make sure that that's easy for you to do. And I think, actually, let me go back real quick. In our chat feature, I think our staff, our moderator is going to post the link to the thought exchange as well. So if you just want to click that link from the chat box, you can do that. And again, if you'll use hashtag session1 so that we can quickly find those questions that are specific to today's session. So we'll know that those are being posted live in this session. All right, so let's begin. We will now share a 2-minute video that walks through the 4 pillars of the Student Assignment Policy, Board Policy 4150. This video helps to provide a foundation for the process that we use in developing the current draft, as well as all other drafts of the proposed enrollment plan.
It's no secret that our school district is growing, and it's growing fast. That means each year we need to open new schools to stay ahead of the curve. To state the obvious, we have to fill these schools with students. And this can only be done through student assignment. Each year, some students are assigned to one of our new schools or reassigned to an existing school. This ensures we have balanced school populations across the district. We know families love their schools and that student assignment decisions can be worrisome. That's why we want to be completely transparent in how we make them. Our school board has established 4 pillars that guide each and every student assignment decision. Here's what they mean and how they work together. Student achievement. This is what we're all about as a school district. We know high concentrations of poverty or too many low-performing students in a school can hinder progress. This pillar compels us to think about whether a student assignment plan can help address some of those issues. Stability. Essentially, we try to keep as many children at their current school through the exit grade as possible. When reassignments are necessary, we provide the opportunity for some students to grandfather and stay at their current school through the exit grade. Operational efficiency. This pillar is about making sure all of our schools are at their best use. Overcrowded schools are a problem. Classrooms packed with too many students are one thing, but then there are the endless carpool lines, bathroom facilities that can't comfortably accommodate everyone, and having to start lunch when most people are still working on breakfast. On the flip side, having under-enrolled schools is an inefficient use of public resources, particularly when there are crowded schools nearby. Proximity. Okay, this one can be a little tricky. In a perfect world, houses would be built in neat little rows on a predictable timeline and at a slow and steady rate. As it is, we live in an imperfect world, where lots and lots of homes pop up in one area while growth is slight or non-existent in others. For this reason, it is impossible to send every child to their most proximate school, unless we wanted some of our schools bursting at the seams while others are half empty. That said, this pillar states that we will send students to schools within a reasonable distance. Often the difference between the most proximate school and the next most proximate is no more than a couple of miles. Please remember that we must consider all 4 of these pillars when making assignment decisions. There is no priority among the 4 that applies in every situation. It's a balancing act that ultimately helps us come up with the best possible plan for everyone. Thank you for working with us to ensure our school system continues to serve all students well.
All right, so hopefully that quick video helped to explain a little bit about how Board Policy 4150 works and how those different pillars are looked at and evaluated with each year's enrollment proposal as we make recommendations. Before we walk through the specific recommendations in the current proposal for the Northwestern area, we will review a few of the factors that impact the development of this year's enrollment plan. The goal is to help you see the planning path and the different types of information and resources that are used as recommendations are created for each year's enrollment plan, and specifically this year's enrollment plan. Much of what you're going to see here was shared during the board's work session, and so we won't spend a lot of time on the updates, but I do want to share them with you so that you can have that sort of sense of context of how we got from where we started from the planning process to where we are with the recommendations. And then the bulk of our conversation today will be around the first draft of the enrollment plan and the recommendations specific to the Northwestern area. And then, of course, we will reserve as much time as possible for all of those questions that you may have. So as we start with the updates, first we want to talk about our public engagement process. One thing to let you know, and I presume all of you have been to the website if you found the link to today's session, but we do want to make sure that you go to this website frequently and often. We're constantly updating our FAQ section of the webpage. As many of you may know from this area, there were several questions particularly related to the recommendations around Pleasant Grove Elementary, and we've already added several of those questions to our FAQ section so that you can see those responses, and I'll talk through some of those today. We know that there were concerns that maybe it was a bad idea to change schools in general, perhaps stability for all students across all grades are some of the comments and thoughts we've received so far. Many concerns about the potential impact of Pleasant Grove being traditional, Alston Ridge being multi-track year-round, and how that can create some calendar misalignment for families. We also heard comments that we hear quite regularly about established relationships with schools and staff, and concerns about unfamiliarity with the proposed school if you're being recommended to change to a different school. Even some concerns, as were outlined a little bit in the video, about perhaps the proposed change in school assignment would have you going to a school that's a little bit farther away than the school you're currently going to. So we have been looking at those questions and using those to build out the FAQ, but again, we're happy to answer those for you here tonight as well, but I wanted to let you know that we did have been looking at those and are working to address those questions. As I mentioned earlier, as we go through today's session, I'll repost this slide multiple times so that if you do want to put a question in the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet itself, just click on that shape there on the bottom right of your screen. If you're using a mobile device, you'll need to click the three dots and find that shape. And then ultimately, you're looking for this icon that shows you that that's the Q&A feature. And you can submit as many questions as you like. Again, we'll keep them confidential and anonymous, but we will use those to answer questions later in today's session. So one thing that we reviewed with the board was the outreach that we did in the spring of 2023, recognizing that not only is Woods Creek Elementary opening for the 24-25 school year, but there are several other schools that are slated to open for the 25-26 school year. We wanted to have some early conversations with families in these areas that will be impacted by those new school openings. And as you can see, Parkside Middle is one of the schools in this area, in the Northwestern area. And so we held that session earlier in the spring. When we held these sessions, we asked families and participants in small groups this question about what district leadership should potentially be aware of and take into consideration when managing growth and school crowding. And we had a lot of responses. Some of them were individual to each school area, but the sort of summary results were that communicating information and decisions early is important. So we will continue to do our absolute best to provide as much information to families throughout the planning process as possible. We also noticed here on this third line, the allowing for cohort continuity, and we did see that in some of the comments on the thought exchange already for draft one, being able to make sure that students can stay together as they age forward in school. You'll see other conversations about being able to start and finish at the same school. So again, this was a summary list of all of the feedback we received from those public engagement sessions in the spring. For a full accounting of all of the information that was collected, you can go to our proposal website, and there's a link back to all of these community engagement sessions that were held in the spring if you want to see more about the specific feedback from the different areas. Another question that we asked these groups was, what are the most important things that leadership should be aware of and take into consideration when opening a new school in a community? And so this was specific to the new school openings. And again, we had several themes come out of this discussion. This discussion was held on Thought Exchange. You can see themes like communication, continuity, crowding, planning for growth, proximity, quality education for all, school choice, school operations and transportation were general themes that sort of came across all of the sessions. But you can see we also provided feedback to the board about how they might have shaken out region by region. So as an example, for the Woods Creek Elementary conversation, proximity, transportation, and continuity were certainly top of mind for families in this area. You might see a slightly different adjustment for the other areas. So again, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on this section, but I do want to show you the work that we've done leading up to that first draft release about a week or so ago. What we learned from these conversations with the public in the spring was that we have a couple of more deep questions for our parents and families to ask for some more context and some more understanding. And so we wanted to conduct some focus groups to get that information. We also heard very clearly that we need to review our stability rules to try to do what we can to provide as much stability for families as possible. If you were here when the video was presented at the opening of the session, you might have heard the video use the term grandfather. And so that's a term we used to use. We've switched over to stability because it's a more accurate description of what we're offering for students, which is that stability of school assignment. So those are sort of interchangeable terms. In addition, we were looking at feeder patterns. We did hear a lot of feedback about K-8 continuity and calendar continuity, and so we wanted to take that into consideration. The focus groups that we held in the early summer months really focused on two core topics: cohort continuity and school calendar alignment. As I mentioned, those came out as major discussion points in those early outreach events. So we partnered with our data research and accountability department and held a series of 3 focus groups that had between 5 and 7 participants each. And what we learned from those focus groups, again, summary total, was that keeping students together was really the core essence of what families mean when they use terms like cohort continuity. We did learn that that can mean different things. Perhaps it's making sure the entire neighborhood can go to the same school. And so that's something that we thought about and factored into some of our recommendations for this year. Perhaps it's being on the same calendar or track. Maybe that's what a family might mean by keeping students together. Perhaps it means being able to rise together, let's say from 5th grade to 6th grade as they're transitioning from elementary to middle school, or from 8th grade to 9th grade as they're transitioning from middle to high school. So all of these sort of ideas came out of those focus groups to help us better understand that generally speaking, families really are desirous of keeping students together because of the sense of the strong bonds and relationships that students form with other students and how that can support them in their academic growth long term. We did ask students or families in these areas, and this is where I was very careful when I shared this with the board. We did specifically reach out to families where the new schools are coming. So these are largely schools in our high growth portions of the county, largely in the western and southern regions of the county. Yet when we posed this question to families and said, hey, as we're dealing with crowding and enrollment growth, should reassignment, capping, year-round calendar, what's the preferred option sort of as a starting point? And we did hear from a lot of families that converting schools to a multi-track year-round calendar was preferable perhaps to capping or something else. So that's just information for us to share. But again, we have to be careful to not convey that this is a sentiment of the entire district, because as I mentioned, focus groups for small numbers of families. In addition, we need to be careful that we don't stretch this to say that this represents the entirety of the district, as there are many parts of the district that might answer these questions differently. And so it's just a starting point of information for us as staff, but certainly not something that we want to use broadly across the entire district. And then we did pose the question about calendar alignment. We have had an emphasis over the last several years that if a multi-track year-round elementary school was a student's elementary school, could we try to align and have a multi-track middle school be a partner so we could have that K-8 calendar alignment? And again, conversely, traditional elementary and traditional middle. And so the question that we were asking the group was, hey, as your students are rising into middle school, how important is it, particularly in the multi-track year-round space, to have a K-5 multi-track year-round and a 6-8 multi-track year-round be year-based schools? Or would maybe a 6-12 traditional calendar alignment be preferred in that same situation? And really, our answers were inconclusive. We did find that it varied by family and circumstance. And so we're going to continue to probe this question and see what's a best fit for the district long term. But it was a sort of an interesting starting point for us. Okay. So then with our public engagement, that was what we did in the spring and in the summer, and we pulled that information together and used that to sort of influence some of the recommendations we're making here in draft 1. In addition, our public engagement continues. And so you're step 1, you're our very first virtual public information session for the first draft. And so I thank you for joining us today. And again, the goal is to help you see how we built the recommendations, what the recommendations specifically are, and then most importantly, get to your questions that you may have related to how the plan might impact you and your family. So we're having our first session today. If you find this session helpful and you have friends or neighbors that couldn't join us, please encourage them to watch the recording once it's posted. As Corrali mentioned in the opening, we will post it to our enrollment website so that you can look at it again later. Or if you want to rewatch it to sort of rethink how some conversations were had, that's fine as well. In addition, we have other sessions that are coming along. This coming Thursday, we'll be talking about the central, northern, and northeastern areas. On the 4th, which is Wednesday of next week, we'll be talking about the southern and southwestern areas. And then on October 5th, we're going to have a combined session. We'll talk first about the southeastern area, and then we'll have sufficient time to also provide a general overview for anyone that couldn't potentially make it to any of the earlier sessions. Again, all of them will be recorded, all of them will be posted, and most importantly, the questions that are generated from these sessions will also help to drive any recommended adjustments for draft 2, as well as updating our website in the FAQ portion so that other families can gain from what you've learned here today. I said I'll show you this slide multiple times. Obviously, we really want to encourage you to use the thought exchange, use the hashtag session1 as you're asking your questions, making your suggestions, or putting in comments. This is the one and sort of official public comment capture tool for our board. This way, every board member can see every question and every statement, and of course, staff can evaluate all of those questions. In addition, I can see that several of you have already started using the Q&A feature for the Google Meet itself. So if you'd like to use the Q&A feature, please know that I can't guarantee all of those questions will make it into the public comment tool, but they can help us to support our FAQ. If you're using your computer, you're looking for that symbol on the bottom right corner of your computer. If you're using a mobile device, you'll need to look for the 3 dots and then look for that icon. And then of course, the QA features, what you're really looking for to submit that question. Again, we'll keep all of your questions anonymous and confidential and make sure that we answer absolutely as many of those as we can toward the end of today's session. Other information that we share with the board during these sessions is updates on where we are with our captain overcrowded schools. The schools that are highlighted in green, and you'll see this as sort of a strategy throughout today's presentation, represent those schools that are near your area or in your area that are currently capped. And so Alston Ridge Elementary is one of those capped schools, Cedar Fork Elementary, Hortons Creek Elementary, and Parkside Elementary. And we also make special note that both Alston Ridge and Parkside are already multi-track year-round, so addressing crowding by changing the calendar of those schools certainly wouldn't solve the concerns there. Separately, we review with the board what the general crowding looks like in the region. And as you can see, any area that's represented in red is an elementary school-based attendance area that was projected to be at or above 110% crowding for this current school year. These were shared with the board back in February, so they were projections. The orange represents 100 to 110% crowding, and the yellow represents anywhere from 90 to 100% crowding. So as you can see, the K-3 class size legislation, high growth rates in our county have really lent itself towards some significantly crowded elementary schools throughout the district. At the middle school level, we have additional schools that are capped, Apex Friendship and Mills Park. And at the high school level, we have Apex Friendship, Heritage, and Panther Creek. I recognize that Mills Park and Panther Creek are pretty proximate to the Northwestern area, so I did want to highlight those for you as well. As a reminder, the middle school crowding, again, the color palette is the same. Anything that's red would be above 110%. Anything that's orange would be between 100 and 110. And the yellow is between 90 and 100. So again, significant crowding along the west and the south. At the high school level, this is the projected crowding. That bright red that you see represents the Apex Friendship high school-based attendance area. And then, of course, you can see Panther Creek as a capped school is already over 100 to 110% crowding projected. So some of our high schools could use some relief as well. Right. So to that point, what are we doing as a district with our capital improvement fund? So as you may recall, there are bonds that get passed and approved every couple of years to allow the district to have some funds to build new schools, in addition to help with renovations. So the new schools that are projected to open, as I mentioned at the outset, in 24-25, we are projected to open Woods Creek Elementary. If you're familiar with the area, Balcom Elementary students are currently housed in that facility while their campus is being renovated. For 25-26, you can see a long list of schools that are projected to open for 25-26. So that's Hilltop Needmore, Rex Road, Bowling Road, Felton Grove High School, Pleasant Plains Elementary, and then the Parkside Middle Campus that's in this region. In the out years, in 27-28, Morrisville High School is projected to open, and in 2030-31, Pool Road, the Pool Road site for elementary school is projected to open. I always have to pause and say, please know that all of these schedules are subject to market volatility, scope changes, as well as design and construction schedules. So they all could potentially impact these, but right now, this is the best information we have at this time. Just to give you an idea, because I'm not sure that everybody knows where all these schools are located, the school that's highlighted with the red circle represents the location of Woods Creek Elementary. Again, this school is projected to open for 24-25, and so we do have recommendations for this school in the proposal currently. The schools that are identified here with the blue circles is that list of schools that's projected to open in 25-26. So we'll be bringing recommendations for those attendance areas next fall. And then in the out years, in future years, we'll be bringing recommendations for Morrisville High School as well as the Pool Road Elementaries, or the Pool Road site for the elementary school. Okay, so that's how where we are. One thing I haven't specifically mentioned in this session is that what really kickstarts our annual enrollment planning process each year is the long-range planning forecast. That is presented and shared with the board in January, February timeframe, and it's a partnership project that with other outside entities, and all of that information is posted to our website, so you can access that. And so those long-range projections really help us to get a forecast that looks 10 years out, as well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years out. So that helps us to look at the growth that's being projected based on approved residential projects, as well as what we're seeing with live births. It takes a lot of different factors into consideration. And again, I'm not an expert on building that particular project, but you can find information about that on our website, and it's the forecast. So that forecast sort of sets the tone and says, this is how many students we think we're going to have as a district, and it's somewhat of a regional focus, so we can see where that growth is occurring based on municipal data. And then we use that along with our public engagement activities and our outreach with the community and our recognition of what's going on with our capped and crowded schools and what we do know about our future construction program. One thing you didn't see on the CIP slide is an acknowledgement that we do have some major renovations that are occurring at the same time as some of these new schools are opening. So there are chances that we can gain some additional capacity with those renovations. I mentioned Bockham Elementary, so that would be an example. So all of those factors are taken into consideration, and then we bring forward a draft of the enrollment plan. So again, if you have questions, I think one of our moderators shared that if you put the question into the Q&A, it has been copied. Again, we're keeping them anonymous and confidential, so we won't see them in the large group, but they are all being saved so that we can answer those toward the end of today's session. So again, this is how you can leave comments. A reminder, the thought exchange, I love it. Make sure you do #session1 so we know that you're posting the question live today. Okay. Looking at the recommendations for base assignment changes, again, we're going to focus on the ones for this area, but before we get there, I just want to show you a quick overview. So what this slide shares with you are the schools that are projected to be impacted both as a sending school as well as a receiving school. And the map that you see on the right side of the slide demonstrates sort of the general distribution of where these impacts are going to be. And obviously in the Northwest region, you can see some of the recommendations that are included. At the middle school level, I can say that this year's recommendations are based on complementary feeder pattern alignment recommendations based on the elementary recommendations. And you can see the distribution here. And the same thing is true for high schools. The high school recommendations that are included in this year's first draft are specifically to acknowledge a feeder pattern continuity for students based on the elementary recommendations. In our information session, we do want to start here with the stability rules because we recognize that while changing of a school assignment is the least preferred option for all of our families, when it does have to happen and when the recommendation does need to be approved or recommended, we need to think about the impact on family. And so we want to start by talking about the stability rules because we generally find that a lot of families have questions about how would this impact me personally. What I'm going to show you here are the first two sets of stability rule recommendations that specifically apply to the Northwestern area. There is an additional set of stability rules that applies to the Woods Creek Elementary School, and I'll go over that later on, but I wanted to start here and make sure that you were fully aware of what the stability rule recommendations are. So first, we want to note that because there is a significant change being recommended to the attendance area for Pleasant Grove Elementary, the stability rules are slightly different for this school than for other changes from what we would normally call an existing school to an existing school. So as you can see, if the students are being proposed to be assigned from Pleasant Grove to Briar Creek, Leesville Road, or York Elementary, or if the students are recommended to be reassigned from Alston Ridge Elementary or Parkside Elementary into Pleasant Grove, the rules would be the same. And so that is that current students that are rising into the 4th or 5th grade would be automatically eligible for the stability rule, meaning that if they would like to stay at their current school without district transportation, we would approve that as long as the request is made during the stability window, and that would be guaranteed. In addition, if that student who's a rising 4th or 5th grade student has younger siblings that are either already at the school or getting ready to come into kindergarten for the 24-25 school year, all of those students would be eligible to stay at the current school and without district transportation. So the only group of students that would not qualify for the stability rules would be current kindergarten first and second graders, so rising into first, second, or third grade that don't have an older sibling that would qualify under the 4th and 5th grade piece. We recognize that this creates instability for some families, yet we also recognize that to operate a school, we have to have a sufficient number of students attending to be able to get the proper amount of resources and to build a school culture. So we can talk more about your specific questions related to stability as we get toward the end of the session, but I did want to share with you that we're recommending more generous stability rules than we typically have in this situation. Typically, when there's a large reconfiguration or a new school opening type situation, which I know this is not that case, we would recommend that only the rising 5th graders be able to stay, and that if there are younger siblings, they'd only be able to stay for that 1 year with that rising 5th grade student, and then they'd be asked to go to the newly assigned school the following year. So we feel that this represents more generous stability rules than we've been able to offer in the past. There are other recommendations that we'll talk about in this plan that don't involve specifically Pleasant Grove that are in the Northwest region. There's a recommendation for students that are currently assigned to Carpenter, and there are some recommendations for students that are currently assigned to Leesville Elementary. And for those students, because the changes aren't about the significant change in attendance area, we have slightly more generous stability rules that are being proposed for those students, where basically all current students, if they can provide their own transportation, would be eligible to stay at their current school, again, if they can provide their own transportation. So I wanted to get those cleared out so that you'd understand how this may or may not personally impact you if you do have the ability to access the stability rules. So now let's go ahead and talk about the specific recommendations for the Northwestern area. I'm going to talk you through how the map is set up. What you'll see on the left is a map that shows the current base attendance areas for all of the schools impacted. The hashed out areas recommend the portions of these attendance areas that are being recommended to change school assignment. And then the map on the right represents, if approved as recommended, and again, this is still draft one, we're still taking feedback and hearing the conversation and the suggestions and the comments before we come to draft two. But let's say it were to be approved as is, then the map on the right represents the final and new attendance areas for the schools impacted. So let's talk specific to the Pleasant Grove students that are currently at Pleasant Grove that are being recommended for a change in school assignment. The portion that's highlighted at the top of your screen is recommended to go from Pleasant Grove Elementary to Briar Creek Elementary. And Briar Creek Elementary is represented by the yellow sort of triangle that's on the top left side of that map. The more light blue area, I think most of you are probably familiar with the region, has the airport and Umstead Park. All of that is current Pleasant Grove Elementary base attendance area. So that first circle is being recommended to be assigned from Pleasant Grove Elementary to Briar Creek Elementary. We do recognize that that is a calendar change for those families, and we also recognize that this might potentially be a closer school assignment for these students. For the circle, the larger circle that's kind of along the 70 corridor, so this would be Glenwood Avenue or the US 70 corridor, we're recommending that this portion of the existing Pleasant Grove attendance area be assigned in a split fashion, some to Leesville Elementary and another portion to York Elementary. And so this would align the feeder patterns for these students. All of the students that you see in the two circles on the left side of your screen already have assignments to middle schools such as Leesville Middle and then Leesville High School or Oberlin Middle and Broughton High School. So this would push the students into a feeder pattern that would be more aligned with their middle and high school patterns. The portion on the left then, so what this means for Pleasant Grove is that with such a significant change in the attendance area, a large majority of the current base for Pleasant Grove, an overwhelming majority of the current base for Pleasant Grove would no longer be assigned to Pleasant Grove. And that would free up sufficient capacity to take entire neighborhoods, keep neighborhoods together so we don't have to split them up and that we don't have to have students going to capped out and overflow schools. Be able to take entire student populations from a portion of the Alston Ridge Elementary base. I think most of you are familiar with Kitts Creek area, and then the yellow portion, which is part of the existing Parkside Elementary base, areas like Providence Place, Shiloh Grove. So taking these entire neighborhoods and assigning them to Pleasant Grove so that by and large, the students that make up the Pleasant Grove campus beginning in 24, 25 and beyond would be coming from these two areas. We do recognize that in some cases, Pleasant Grove is a little bit further than the current school assignment. However, it is the closest school with available capacity. And so that's part of what's driving this recommendation. We also recognize that both Alston Ridge and Parkside Elementary are capped, but they're also multi-track year-round elementary schools, and Pleasant Grove is currently a traditional elementary school. And so we do recognize that that would be a calendar change. So a couple of the things that we're thinking through is if families are interested, if you're eligible for the stability rules, obviously that would be a way to maintain your multi-track calendar at schools like Alston Ridge and Parkside. If you were looking for a different school and you're not eligible for stability rules, we could look to see if there's interest in going to a different year-round elementary school. There's been some murmuring about the potential for perhaps changing the calendar at Pleasant Grove Elementary. I don't know that that's a solid recommendation, but that's certainly something that could be considered. And certainly if it's more about a K-8 alignment and it's more about making sure the middle school student could also be on a traditional calendar, we could certainly make sure we support families in any request they'd have for a traditional calendar middle school. And so that's ways that we're thinking through resolving this. Please know that we do recognize that that is a calendar mismatch, which goes a little bit against the feedback, obviously, that we receive from parents. But we also acknowledge that Parkside Middle is scheduled to open in the coming year. And so we were hesitant to do a middle school reassignment for 24, 25, and then again potentially be impacted in 25, 26. And so we thought for stability of families, stability of those middle school students, to leave the middle school and high school assignments as is, and then to make some proposals as we get to the point where Parkside Middle is opening, and then a few years down the road when Morrisville High School is opening. Obviously, that'll impact this same region as well. Just two new schools coming back to back, and so that's just something we're thinking through. I also want to highlight with the map on the right, there's this small little area. You might see the school Stow Elementary on the list. This small little area is actually an extension of the existing Stow Elementary base. It's a roadway connection. And so we're recommending for ease of transportation and neighborhood continuity to align this area with Stow Elementary. This slide then reflects what the proposals could do to the projected crowding at each one of the schools impacted. The chart that's on the top that starts with 2023-24 base school represents what the projected crowding would be at all of these schools based on, as I said, that long-range planning forecast that was done earlier in the year, what that projected crowding would look like if we made no assignment changes. So as you can see, the pressure on schools like Alston Ridge Elementary and Parkside Elementary are significant and continuing to grow. These areas have continuous development that is going on that's going to continue to further crowd these campuses and leave their caps in place. When you look at the chart on the bottom that's labeled 2024-25 base school, this reflects if the proposal goes through as recommended and every single one of the students impacted takes the new school assignment. This would be the projected impact. So we do need to be careful because we recognize that with our more generous stability rules, quite a number of families would most likely exercise their rights to do the stability transfer and remain at their current school. And so we wouldn't see such a significant drop, let's say for Alston Ridge Elementary. It would be much more gradual. And you wouldn't necessarily such a significant drop at Parkside Elementary. It would be much more gradual. So we do want to keep that in mind. You'll also note that Leesville Road Elementary is listed as having impacts from other assignment change recommendations. And we're going to talk through those in just a minute because that's sort of in our Northwestern area as well. And I want to make sure you have that full scope of how the two sets of recommendations go together. Because, as I mentioned, the middle school will be being built right alongside the getting ready for that 25-26 projected open date, and the high school will be recommended for Morrisville in the coming years. We don't have any middle school or high school recommended base assignment changes for this area, but we certainly would work with families to help them maintain their calendar continuity. In the central, the area that's labeled in the presentation as central and northern, we do have some recommendations that are very specific to the northwestern part of the county as well. So this area that you're seeing highlighted in this series of maps is currently assigned to Carpenter Elementary. For a point of reference, the yellow line that's kind of dragging diagonally on the left side of the screen represents 440, and the yellow line towards the bottom represents I-40. And so the section that you see highlighted is currently assigned to Carpenter Elementary, Alston Ridge Middle, and Athens Drive High School. And so with this recommendation, we would recommend that these students be reassigned to schools that are significantly closer to home at Holmes Elementary and Olds Elementary. Again, you can see the potential impact on the schools as a result of this recommendation. Because the middle school assignment for this area is Alston Ridge Middle, we would have a complementary recommendation to align that calendar and feeder pattern, align the feeder pattern for these students. And so since all Combs students are assigned to Centennial, we would recommend that the group going to Combs go to Centennial Middle. And since all Old students are assigned to Martin, we would recommend that those students be assigned to Martin Middle as well to align the feeder patterns for these cohorts. And again, you can see the potential impact on crowding at the schools. So these two recommendations are made primarily for transportation efficiency, as well as for some facility utilization benefits to relieve the crowding at schools like Carpenter and Alston Ridge Middle. The next series of recommendations that are specific to the area that I was telling you before that's currently assigned to Leesville Elementary, Leesville Middle, and Leesville High School. So again, to orient you, the yellow lines that you see represent portions of the Beltline. So the lower section is I-40, and then the sort of right section is that other portion of 440. So these students are currently assigned, as I mentioned, to Leesville Elementary, Leesville Middle, and Leesville High School. And so in this recommendation, I'm going to go to another slide real quick so we can zoom in a little bit more. So this just gives you some context. We'll zoom in so you can see the area in a little bit more clarity. With this recommendation, the proposal is to take the portion that's in right along North Raleigh Boulevard and assign it from Leesville Elementary to Joyner Elementary, to take the portion of that sort of rectangular shape that's in the northern section between Glasscock Street and Oakwood Avenue, and take that portion and align it to Underwood Elementary, to take the portion that's kind of in the middle of the rectangular shape that's between Oakwood Avenue and Newbern Avenue and assign that to Powell Elementary, and then to take the portion that's below Newbern Avenue that's remaining in the rectangle, as well as a small portion that's on the northern edge of the Southeast Raleigh Elementary base attendance area, and have those assigned to Hunter. The portion for Southeast Raleigh came up as we were driving the neighborhoods to make the recommendations. We realized that the only egress for that neighborhood is onto East 80th Street. So from a transportation efficiency perspective, it just makes more sense for that area to be assigned to Hunter. So this would, you can see that this is adding on to existing attendance areas for these schools. So these recommendations are being made largely for transportation efficiency, as well as some facility utilization to take advantage of some schools in the downtown area that have seen some gentrification and changing over of neighborhoods that have allowed for some more space at these schools. You can see again on slide 54, that same series of tables. So you can see the projected impact on the crowding for these schools. It does redistribute the enrollment. We noticed that Leesville Road Elementary has slightly changed. These numbers take into account both sets of recommendations. So not only the recommendations to have these students be assigned out of Leesville Elementary, but also the students from Pleasant Grove to be assigned into Leesville Elementary. And so you see how these two recommendations are so very much intertwined, that making the capacity available by removing students from this section allows for that shift from Pleasant Grove into Leesville. Then we have two follow-on recommendations that are complementary to that main recommendation. So as I said, they're Leesville Elementary, Leesville Middle, and Leesville High School currently today. So we would align the middle school feeder patterns by taking these same portions and aligning them to either Martin Middle or Ligon Middle, based on the feeder pattern from the elementary school. And you can see the projected impacts. And then at the high school level, a similar recommendation to align these students to either Broughton High School or Enloe High School, again, consistent with the feeder patterns and the transportation network in their area. So, and you can see the potential impacts at the high school level. All right, we've got a few more points of information to share with you, and then we're going to get into the Q&A section. So I just want to share this link. I think I've seen a lot of stuff coming in through the Q&A, so that's wonderful. It looks like that'll have a lot of questions for us. And again, the link for the thought exchange, if you'll mark it with hashtag session1, then we'll know that it's coming live from today's session and make sure we address that. A couple of other recommendations that we have in the plan are related to calendar application schools. And so I do want to take a moment and make sure I get all my information. When you see NA on the chart, it doesn't mean that families can no longer request these schools. What it means is that the district would no longer provide transportation to these options. So for some families, if they would still like to try for that opposite calendar and they can provide their own transportation and their seats available, we can certainly approve those types of transfers. We're just making recommendations to reduce the impact on our transportation department and our transportation network by removing some of these routes. So again, you can still apply for that transfer and the routes will be changed. What I've tried to do to help us out here also is to highlight with that same sort of greenish color, the schools that are in this Northwestern area. You might see others that are personally impactful for you, so feel free to scan this. And again, this entire presentation was shared with the board on September 19th and is posted with the board materials as well as to our 2024 enrollment proposal site. So if you want to look at this in a little bit slower pace and at your leisure, or any of the slides that I've presented today, you'll be able to do that independently, or you can rewatch the video, whatever makes sense for you. We're trying to make sure we have all that access. So as you look at the Alston Ridge Elementary recommendation, Alston Ridge Elementary currently sees, some families in the Alston Ridge Elementary base currently see either Green Hope or Hortons Creek as a traditional calendar application choice that comes with district transportation. The recommendation would be to remove Hortons Creek from that option, but to leave Green Hope available. However, because both Hortons Creek and Alston Ridge Elementary are CAP schools that are sufficiently crowded to ease the gradual and make more gradual the change in enrollment for these schools, we would recommend that the students who already have transportation to Hortons Creek from this base attendance area would be able to maintain that. And you can see the other recommendations. So just to be more clear, if you see NA, all that means is that the district would no longer provide transportation for this particular option. It does not mean that families could no longer ask for the choice. It would just be a transfer without district transportation. If you see a single asterisk by the name of a school in that right-hand column, it means that we wouldn't add this choice to addresses that don't already see it, but those that already see it would continue to see it. And then if you see that double asterisk in the middle column, that would help you to understand that in these cases, for students who currently are given transportation to these choices, those students would be able to retain that transportation through the 5th grade or unless they move out of the area, but no new students would be able to apply for transportation to these schools from these areas. So I hope that explains the recommendation. And again, these recommendations are largely based on reducing the impact on our transportation department. At the middle elementary school level, you'll also see Hilburn and Briar Creek are on the list, and Hortons Creek and Alston Ridge. It's that same relationship in the opposite direction. So we would simply say that we can't provide transportation to Alston Ridge for any new requests, but those families that are already going would be able to maintain their transportation. In some of the cases for these CAP schools, they weren't capped when they first opened, and we were able to honor some transfer requests based on the calendar difference. However, now that the full residential development has kicked into high gear in all of these areas, and the schools are not only capped, but sending students to overflow schools, we really feel like it's a false option for families, and we don't want to give that false sense of an option. So if you're in the Hortons Creek base and you want a year-round choice, you can ask for year-round choices, and we'll do our absolute best to honor those through the transfer process. At the middle school level, you'll see that 6-8 portion of the Hilburn Drive or Hilburn Drive Academy has a recommendation, and that for Leesville Road Middle School, there is one area that has North Gardner as an option. It's that area that we showed you in the downtown area, and so we're recommending removing that. Okay. We talked about the stability rules earlier, but I want to talk about them one more time because now it might be more relevant if you weren't sure what the recommendations were for your area. This recommendation is specific to Woods Creek Elementary, which is in that southern and southwestern portion of the district. So I won't hang on this slide too long, but I wanted you to see that the recommendations here are pretty much the same as the recommendations for Pleasant Grove. For Pleasant Grove, All the recommendations, again, for the students being recommended to be assigned out of Pleasant Grove into either Briar Creek, Leesville Road, or York Elementary, or for the students that are currently in Alston Ridge or Parkside Elementary base attendance area that are being recommended to be assigned to Pleasant Grove. These are the current draft of the proposed stability rules. A reminder that these are more generous than we've been able to do in the past for similar types of recommendations, but I 100% understand that it doesn't cover everybody. And of course, the added challenge of not being allowed be able to provide district transportation does complicate things for some families who do rely on district transportation. We hear that, we understand that, we talk with the board about that at length. It's just a challenge for us to be able to continue to offer multiple types of transportation for families. So again, more generous rules than historical. However, it does not allow for all students to be able to use the stability rules in this particular recommendation at this time as it's listed in draft 1. The examples that I showed you that are where the students are coming from Carpenter and being recommended to go to Olds or Combs, and the students that are at Leesville and being recommended to go to either Joyner, Underwood, Powell, or Hunter, and then the subsequent middle and high school recommendations that go with those students would be able to fit into this category. So if they could provide their own transportation, they would be eligible for stability transfers in this as currently drafted and proposed. I need to keep saying that because this is just draft 1 and all the feedback that we're receiving will influence and impact what gets shared for draft 2. All right. You know I love my thought exchange and you know I love showing you how to get to the Q&A, but again, I think everyone's figured out how to find themselves there. So one last thing that we want to do before we get into the Q&A. So we're almost there and I thank you for your patience. But again, I really just wanted to help tell the whole story so that you can see all of the work that goes into taking not only forecasting into consideration, but what we know about capped and crowded schools, where projected new schools are going to be opening and where they aren't. You know, in the Northwestern area, there really aren't any new elementary schools on the path. We do have a middle school and a high school coming in a couple of years, but there are no elementary schools in this area that are recommended to open to provide relief for the number of CAP schools that are in this region. So before we get to the Q&A, let's talk about our timeline. So on September 19th, we presented to the board. So that happened last week. We go back to the board on October 17th, and that's when we'll present draft 2, which will include any adjustments that can be made based on the feedback that's received, as well as a full vetting of all of the public engagement and comments and thoughts and suggestions that have been received throughout our public engagement process. In addition, we will hold another public engagement session after draft 2 is released to address any questions or concerns that anyone might have about what's included in draft 2. The board themselves will have a special called public hearing on November 8th, and that'll be a live being able to come and specifically provide public comment through that public hearing. Information on how to register and sign up for that will be posted to our website closer to the date, but that will be an in-person session. And then on November 21st, the board will be presented with the final draft, taking into account all the feedback from the draft 2 release, as well as the public hearing, and make a final, and is scheduled to make a final vote that same day at their meeting. Okay. And I shared this with you before, so this is today's session. If you know of anyone who wants to come to one of the future sessions, we will be talking about those Leesville type recommendations going into the downtown area and some others at our central and northern and northeastern area session on Thursday. On the 4th, we'll be talking mostly about the Woods Creek Elementary recommendation and some other recommendations that are being made in that region. And then on the 5th, we'll be talking mostly about recommendations in the southeastern area. That's Bryan Road Elementary recommendations. And then we should have sufficient time for a general overview for anyone who might have missed any of the first sessions. Again, everything will be recorded and posted on our website so that you can watch the recording at a later time. And so at this time, I'm going to ask our host to help me out. I know that the Q&A section has been lively, and I think a lot of people have been posting questions there. And then I know that our thought exchange has probably been capturing some thoughts and questions as well. And so we want to address as many of those as possible. And so again, I thank you so much for your patience as we got to this point in the session. I know that for a lot of you, this is where you wanted to start, but we really wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to fully understand what the recommendations were before we started jumping into questions. And before I get started, because I'm going to forget later on, I do want to thank Corrali Tornow, our host for tonight, and I want to thank Louis Embrico and Ashley Wilson, our moderators for tonight, because I think they've been like the duck feet underwater the whole time that I've been presenting, trying to make sure they capture all of the questions so that this portion of the session can be as impactful as possible. So with that, I will ask our host to help me out.
All right, Susan, are you ready for 7 pages worth?
Sure.
All right, let's get started. We do have 7 pages worth. Some of them are repeats, so we're going to combine the most important ones.
Okay.
Have you overlaid the Morrisville and RTP Transportation Improvement Plan when defining and more efficient bus routes? This person says, we specifically have serious road limitations around Kitts Creek and Providence Place with minimal crossroads to get over the train tracks and into RTP.
Make sure I capture all the sense of that. Okay. So there's two answers to that question. One is we do work with our municipal partners to get as much information from them as we possibly can to update our roadway networks, to update our residential development understandings, to know what growth is coming. And so we are cognizant that there are some challenges with the roadway network in this area. When we use the term efficient, it starts to take on a life of its own in terms of there are lots of ways to look at efficiency. And so one of the ways that we look at efficiency is if we can gather a majority of students from one area and get them onto consolidated bus routes and take them to a single school, that can provide a significant improvement for transportation efficiency, not only for those families, but for our entire district. So one of the things that we're challenged with in that same area is that if students are what we call capped out or sent to an overflow school, so that can happen for students at Alston Ridge and that can happen for students at Parkside, they then have to be routed on a different bus from other students in their same neighborhood to that overflow school. We do recognize that not all of our CAP schools are actively capping students today. However, they all will be capping students out before the end of the school year if they haven't already started to do so. And so that creates another layer of inefficiency in our transportation network. So the short answer is yes, we are mindful of these impacts and we recognize that they can provide slightly different challenges than what we're seeing today, but we were looking at the whole transportation network when thinking about these recommendations.
Okay. How can parents, you've already mentioned this, but I just want to make sure that we captured it. How can parents of rising 4th or 5th grades at Parkside Elementary request to remain assigned to their current school with no bus?
Okay, perfect. So you might have noticed on some of the stability rule slides that I had a little line that said ask for it during the stability window. So what we will do as we get closer to draft 2, we'll have more specific dates and times to share with you. But basically, once the board approves the plan, within about a week or so, all of our systems are fully updated and we know which students are impacted, and we also know which students are eligible for the stability rules. We will then start contacting those families directly, as well as the principals of their current school, to kind of create a double support system. And we will share with you the link for putting in that request, the time frame for putting in that request, and we'll help you to expedite that request. Our goal is to get everyone who is eligible for stability to be able to, it's going to be an online request, to go online, fill out that request, and get their answer before we leave for the winter break. That way you've got it settled and it's done and you know. So anyone who is eligible for the stability transfer will get that information directly from our office, as well as your principals will be aware so they can support you in this. And you'll be able to go online, submit that application, and you'll get that confirmation before we break for winter break. I do want to put a word of caution. We do send out our assignment notification strips, usually early in December. Those will not show the results of the stability transfer because they're kind of running at the same time. So we do want you to hold on to, print that screen from your transfer portal, but that will become your official assignment and will override whatever's on that piece of paper.
Is there any option for Pleasant Grove to go multi-track year-round?
Excellent question. When we made the recommendation at first, we certainly didn't plan to recommend a change in calendar, but we are hearing a lot of the concerns from this region about that calendar misalignment between a traditional elementary and the year-round at multi-track year-round at Alston Ridge Middle. So we certainly can take that into consideration and discuss that with the board as an option.
When we already have overflow schools, why is capping a challenge? If there's growth in one region, kids are anyway assigned to an overflow school. What is the need to add movement to their lives?
It's hard to visualize what happens with our CAP schools. As much as we think that the newest residents are in the newest subdivisions and those are the students that'll be capped out, and perhaps maybe that's an efficient bus route, the reality is that's not how it works. It's any student who moves into any address in the base attendance area after the cap date and doesn't fit into the school and therefore is sent to the overflow school. So from a transportation efficiency standpoint, we have routes for our students that have to go to overflow schools that are terribly inefficient, having to travel in very awkward transportation routes to pick up those students and deliver them to school. And if we could have a single route for that neighborhood to the base school, that certainly would improve efficiency. So that's just strictly transportation efficiency. And then separately, there is a stability issue. As families are moving into a neighborhood, maybe it's an existing neighborhood, but they're the new resident, they're not able to go to the same schools as the students to the left and the right of them because they moved in later. And so that creates some instability for communities as well. And we've heard very clearly that having entire neighborhoods go to the same school is something that's important to a lot of families in our district, and we're working toward that. While we also hear that going to your closest school is very significantly important, we do recognize that we're trying very hard to get you to the closest school that has available capacity. And in this case, for the Pleasant Grove move in particular, that could then be a stable assignment that would last for a extended period of time. I have heard some concerns that particularly the Kitts Creek neighborhood has been impacted by a number of reassignments over the years just because of the growth in the region. And so the goal here would be to stabilize that assignment area for this school area.
This question wants to confirm an approximate number of students being impacted from Alston Ridge Elementary and Parkside to Pleasant Grove. We usually don't do that, but I will let you answer that.
Sure. This early in the process, we try not to share actual numbers of students because it's still draft one. So what we do talk about are the percentage changes. And so I don't have a printout of my slide deck and I don't want to get you all dizzy, but if we go back to the slide that shows the before and after percentages, it gives you a rough idea of the percent reduction in enrollment. But again, I do need to be cautious because the total number of students impacted will change if there are any amendments to the draft, and will be reduced as a significant number of students accept the stability transfer. So what I showed you on that proposal slide, so I just caution you to look at those carefully. Those are presuming that every student impacted takes the new assignment. So that's probably extreme. We're looking for a much more gradual impact on the schools over time. So again, we'll have better numbers as we get closer to the final draft, but right now we don't share specific numbers and student counts only because it's so fluid at this point since we're still in the early draft phases.
A general one, but are additional efforts being made to get new bus drivers? This plan will require additional busing for Kitts Creek to Pleasant Grove.
We actually looked at the entire set of recommendations throughout all 4 regions with our transportation department, and they did share that all the recommendations that are included in the plan are at worst neutral in terms of their impacts on the transportation network, and in some cases they're actually improving the transportation network. I can't speak specifically to what's happening in the transportation department, but I know there have been a lot of public meetings and committee meetings and workshops talking about our efforts to increase the base of drivers, because I think everyone agrees if we could simply get more drivers, we'd be able to accomplish a lot more. However, that would be something for a different group that's outside the scope of the work that I do. But again, we did verify that everything we're recommending is at worst neutral to the transportation network, and at best actually provides some improvements in reducing some routes.
On slide 22, calendar alignment section, did you poll families to understand if breaking up the calendar into K5 and 9-12 alignment and only 6-8 alignment is okay? There were 2 major calendar switches for students between 5th and 9th grade.
So if I understand the question correctly, and so I'll try to answer it a couple ways just to make sure I fully understand the question. When we brought the focus groups together to ask the question about calendar alignment, we were really focusing on that sense. Let me backtrack. We all recognize that if you have traditional calendar for elementary, middle, and high school, then obviously you have K-12 calendar alignment. And we recognize that as of today, and I cannot see anywhere in our foreseeable future that we would have a multi-track year-round high school. It's just not advised. We're never going to have a K-12 multi-track year-round calendar alignment. We recognize that that's something that's not going to happen. So we recognize that the large majority of our high school campuses run on a traditional calendar. And I say that because some of you may be familiar with our early colleges. They're going to follow the college calendar for the partner school that they're with. And we also have Southeast Raleigh High School that runs on the modified calendar. So just in case you weren't aware, but the large majority of our high schools all operate on that traditional calendar. So the question that we posed to families was, if you've got a student who's at multi-track year-round elementary K-5, would you prefer to have traditional calendar from 6-12? That way the alignment starts earlier and connects those older students together. Or would you prefer to have K-8 multi-track year-round calendar alignment and then deal with the traditional calendar once the students got to high school? And as I tried to share in that quick update, it was really inconclusive for families that were reflective of, let's say, an elementary age student that's maybe a kindergarten or first grade student. They really felt compelled to think about maybe that K-8 alignment. Perhaps it was related to the needs of their students academically. Perhaps some families talked about students with IEPs wanting to have that consistency of calendar all the way through the 8th grade. Others talked about childcare needs and being able to coordinate childcare and have all of the students go to the same childcare center or service. Then when we talked with families that had students in middle and high school, some of them were starting to see the advantages of having a 6-12 traditional calendar alignment, despite the fact that the elementary students would still be on multi-track year-round. So in general, what we took from that focus group is that it's really inconclusive, and at this time, it's really family by family, but we certainly recognize one of the proposals right now would have a base assignment be K-5 traditional, 6-8 multi-track year-round, and 9-12 traditional. We know that that is not ideal and that is not preferred. And the only reason we're making the recommendation currently this way is because we didn't want to upset and destabilize the middle schools students in this area, knowing that Parkside Middle will be opening soon. And we would be coming to make some recommendations related to that school. However, I did hear one question tonight about the chance for perhaps Pleasant Grove being multi-track, so that's certainly something we can consider and to see if that would help solve some of the concerns for the area.
How were the focus groups selected? Were they from the area who attend the school or outside?
So the focus groups were a subset of the group of families that participated and were invited to those public engagement sessions that were earlier in the spring. So the group of families that were invited to talk about the opening of Parkside Middle, to talk about the opening of Woods Creek, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I said when I referenced the focus group work that we did need to be careful not to extend these results broadly across the entire district. However, it was some insight that provided some meaningful feedback for us as staff as we made some considerations leading up to not only this plan, but future plans. We will continue our efforts with focus groups and we'll continue our efforts with public engagement this coming spring as well as we're starting to plan for the 25-26 school year too. So this pattern and this path has been very successful for us, and we're going to continue it and expand it wherever possible.
If overcrowding is the major concern, why wouldn't you convert more schools, Cedar Fork, Green Hope, Pleasant Grove, to year-round to help with capacity and align with the year-round middle schools? Also, wouldn't Parkside Middle definitely be year-round for the same reason?
So excellent question. It's a question we debate internally and with the board every year is what's the right fit for each school? What's the right fit for each community? And where is the balance between having a distribution of multi-track year-round schools and traditional schools in a particular region? So we do annually look at this possible outcome. And I will say that the results of the focus groups this year and even last year about this shifting mindset toward multi-track year-round being a good solution for crowding is a change. As a community, as a district, it's not been the most favored option. And so that's sort of a new trend that we're seeing. And so we're just trying to make sure that we take into consideration all of the factors for every community, how the buildings are used. We know that we have some of our elementary schools that have very strong partnerships with local municipalities that use them for summer camps and summer things like that. So that if they went multi-track year round, they'd have to dissolve those partnerships. So we're really looking at all aspects of those questions. But yes, converting schools to multi-track year round is a topic of conversation, but we also know that it also is destabilizing for families for existing students to change calendars at their current campus. And so we want to be very thoughtful with those recommendations.
How can I find out if my base school is capped? If capped, how can I pick a different school? Also, what if I want to pick a different school than my base school?
Ooh, there's a lot of questions in one. Okay, I think I got it. All right, so you can tell if your school is capped. Our presentation includes the list of capped schools. There's also a portion of our regular student assignment webpage that links to capped schools, and you can look there and see if the school is capped. Now, this is where I always do my public service announcement. Some of our schools are capped, but may still have room for your student. Perhaps they're full in kindergarten, but they might still have a couple of seats in first grade. Or perhaps they're full in fourth grade, but they still have a couple of seats in third grade. So we always ask you to call the school first and contact them and get registered there. So that's how you can know if, when you look up your address, you type in your address and let's say it says Hortons Creek is your school, I can tell you Hortons Creek is a capped school. What I can't tell you right here today is which grades are full. So what you'll do is call the school, ask them if there's still room. And then the first step would be that they'll make sure you have a school assignment and they'll assign you to the overflow school that is attached to that school so that you can make sure you have a school assignment. Then there are two different ways to ask for a change in school. One is our magnet application period. And at this stage, we're talking about mostly elementary students, so it's mostly magnet. But if you have a middle school student or a high school student, we also have our early college applications that happen at the same time as magnet, particularly in the fall. So if your student is interested in going to something other than the base school and you're interested in one of our magnet programs or our early college or leadership academy programs, then you can put those applications in starting in mid-October. We'll have a big announcement about that when it launches. It's usually around October 15th. But we'll launch that application period and we keep it open through mid to late January. That way you have sufficient time to visit and tour schools before making a final decision on how you want to rank order your choices. And so you can list up to, I think it's 3 choices on that application. Once you do that, that could be an option for you. So you could ask for a school that way. And we use a lottery and priorities to figure out how to seat students in those schools. The other option is our more traditional transfer request process. And that official window opens shortly after the results for magnet are released. I think this year it's going to be the first week of March. And then you can put in a transfer to really any school in the district based on your own personal reasons. So you could explain your hardship reasons. Maybe it's related to daycare needs. Maybe it's related to before and after school care needs. Maybe it's related to a different calendar. You're really interested in the opposite calendar from your base school. And so you can put those requests in. You have the best chance of getting an approved transfer during that early window because that's when the most seats are available. However, we do have to apply some policy guidelines to those and make sure that they're aligned with policy. And then those are your 2 main options to ask for something other than your base school. So I think I answered all 3 parts. Yes, Carly? Okay.
You got it. Can you explain the difference between public, magnet, and charter schools?
So technically, all 3 of those things that you said are public schools. And so the difference is Wake County Public Schools is the set of schools that are governed by the Wake County Board of Education. We have approximately 200 schools between elementary, middle, high school, early college, et cetera, that are governed by Wake County Public Schools. Every student who lives in Wake County is eligible to attend the school for their address, free, part of your county taxes. And I do want to make that distinction. We are a county-based system, which means that municipal taxes and municipalities are not specifically responsible for any of the funding that goes to public schools, nor opening them or building them or constructing them. All of that is managed at the county level. So the county commissioners are our partner to help us get funding for construction and renovations. And then our Wake County Board of Education is responsible for deciding how those dollars should be distributed, as well as what the assignment rules should be. The magnet schools are a portion of our school district. So the magnet schools are schools within Wake County Public Schools that have specific themes. They get, generally, they'll start with some additional federal funding to help launch those programs. It's a magnificent program for our district, and it really offers families a vibrant set of choices for different types of academic programming, anything from STEM to arts to language immersion. We have a Mandarin immersion program in addition to Spanish language immersion and dual language programs. yeah, really anything to not, we have one that's a play and ingenuity school, like how exciting. Students are really encouraged to do hands-on activities throughout the day. We have a Montessori element at our Kingswood Elementary site. We have the International Baccalaureate program. I'm going to miss something. So there's just lots and lots of different special curricular programs that are available at the magnet schools. The investment you're going to make as a family is it's probably going to be a little further away from your home, but it's an amazing program and it gives your students some wonderful opportunities. And then if you are a magnet student at the elementary level, then you would have that stability of knowing you could follow on that feeder pattern into middle school and high school to stay on that magnet pathway. And then charter schools, they're just governed by the state. They're not part of our district. Some of them are located within Wake County, but they are not governed by our school board. They're governed by independent school boards.
How will the school system support students from satellite communities who need to remain at their current school to continue in specific academic cohorts to complete certifications?
So where we're at right now with our stability rules is that if students want to stay at a school that would no longer be the base assignment for their area, then they would need to provide their own transportation. And so that is something that it's just a reality of where we are. We're not able to provide additional transportation for students to continue attending schools that are no longer their base. That's not to say that we can't partner with the principals at the school to see if there are ways to help the student get into carpool districts or, to things like that. But we could certainly talk with those families individually about how we can maybe look for some supports within the school community. But as a district, we certainly can't provide yellow bus transportation, but we could find other alternatives to try to help keep those students in those schools if that's what they would like to do. The other option is what a lot of families don't realize is that most of our high schools are comprehensive and have a lot of different programs. So while there are some specific programs at certain schools, there is a good chance that there's a match or a very closely aligned match to that program at another school in the district. So we could also talk about and see if there's a way to have that continuity at the new base school. So there's a couple of different ways we can tackle that, but I think that might be an individual question we'd want to help that family with as we get closer to whether or not this plan gets approved. And I'm going to give you a way to do that before we leave.
Can students stay at Parkside with base assignment?
We've lost our host. Lewis or Ashley, can you see the question that she was asking? Corrali, we lost you for a few seconds and I didn't hear the whole question.
Sorry about that. Can the student stay at Parkside with base assignment changing to Pleasant Grove if he's in kindergarten and there are no siblings currently at the school?
So that student would not fit the stability rule eligibility requirements. So if I've got a current kindergarten student and that's the only student I currently have attending Parkside, the stability rules would not make that student automatically eligible. So you wouldn't get that invitation in November, December to put in the stability request. However, you would still have the ability to put in a transfer request in the spring, like I said, that March transfer period. And depending on seat availability, we would see what we could do, but I don't want to overpromise. We do have to think about space availability at that school and class sizes at that school as well. So we will look at those individually based on individual unique hardship concerns aligned with all of the guidance that's in policy 4150. So there would be a way to ask for it. I just want to be hesitant to say we couldn't guarantee that that would be approved.
How is proximity calculated? Just a map, or is an individual bus route used to calculate distance students will travel?
We don't in policy have a hard definition for proximity, as was alluded to in the video. So it's not that we say that it has to be X number of miles or tenths of a mile or anything like that. So when we are talking about proximity from a student assignment perspective, we are looking at roadway networks and we're thinking about how those buses would be routed, but there's not specific guidance in policy to tell us that, it needs to be less than 5 miles or less than 10 miles. And part of that is because, as I mentioned earlier, we're a county-based system. We're a system of schools across the entire county. And in some areas, your absolute closest school could be more than 10 miles away. So the board has always shied away from specifically calling out an actual mileage number. So for us, when we're thinking about proximity, we're thinking about schools that are relatively close to the community that don't have a terribly extensive commute. However, we always have to balance that with the other factors and the other pillars, such as student achievement, operational efficiency. And stability, of course, we try to factor in with our stability rules as much as possible, and our new thinking about this sort of concept of cohort continuity as well, or our expanded thinking about that. I shouldn't say new.
Is there a risk with shifting Pleasant Grove to 99% enrollment? Could kids be moved again?
Excellent question. The recommendation that we've made are for neighborhoods that have sort of capped out at their growth, so they're stable neighborhoods. So our proposal and our projections long term are that the neighborhoods that are being recommended to go to Pleasant Grove could have that as a stable assignment for an extended period of time and not be subject to current current conditions. But because of the existing attendance area for Pleasant Grove being largely the airport and an industrial area, and that these two neighborhoods being largely built out, we feel that this would be, based on all the numbers that we have today and what we can see in terms of residential development, it would be that would not happen. It would be able to sustain the growth. And then I'll throw in there, I'm not trying to like stir the pot, but that concept that someone brought up earlier today is intriguing to me about perhaps, Pleasant Grove being multi-track year round, and that could provide even an additional cushion to the campus if needed. But again, that this is early. It was an interesting point to be made here today in the information session. We certainly want to take that back to the board for a more extensive conversation.
Do I have it correct that if our current base school is year-round and the projection is for a calendar change school, there is an opportunity to request my child go to another year-round school as long as I provide transportation?
Short answer is yes. And the longer answer is we just need to make sure that what you're asking for has room and availability and meets policy guidelines, but yes. Really, the impact on the calendar application choices is more about the transportation element. In some cases, it's because the schools that are on the list are capped, and of course, that would be a different conversation. But in a large majority of the cases, it's really about helping us to reduce the pressure on our transportation network.
What is the year-round option for Pleasant Grove? If Alston Ridge has two traditional options, Green Hope / Pleasant Grove, why isn't the county providing a year-round option for Pleasant Grove?
Again, thank you for that question. That's a really important question. Again, as we're continuing to look to reduce transportation, what we would say is that if there's a family that's assigned to Pleasant Grove and let's say it remains traditional calendar and they would prefer the year-round calendar, but they're not automatically eligible under the stability rules to stay at, let's say, Alston Ridge or Parkside, we would certainly entertain a transfer request to a different multi-track year-round school that would meet the needs of your family so long as you could provide the transportation. So again, when we say that we're not having a calendar application school, what we're really saying is that we're not offering transportation to that choice, but you as a family then would be free to ask for the year-round school that meets your needs. That's not capped. I would encourage you not to ask for a seat at a capped school because obviously the students in the neighborhood will have first dibs to those seats.
We are nearing time, so in respect to everyone's time, we're going to get ready to wrap up. I'm going to just give you a few more questions.
Okay.
Would it be possible for Pleasant Grove Elementary to start the school day a bit earlier so students can be dismissed earlier? With the PM bus commute being longer, I'm concerned about how late my children will be getting home.
We can certainly take that feedback to our transportation department as they're developing bell schedules for the schools.
How is operational efficiency measured?
Excellent question. So operational efficiency, as it's outlined in Board Policy 4150, covers two core areas. One is facility utilization. So how well are we utilizing the available seats in our existing school set? Keeping in mind that some of our schools have a significant number of trailers on their campus, and there is mindfulness to reduce the need for those trailers because we recognize they're not everyone's favorite learning environment. I hear some campuses call them cottages and those sorts of things, but we do recognize that Trailers are an addition to a campus to help deal with overcrowding and surplus students, but it was not part of this necessarily the master plan for use for a facility. So when we're talking about operational facility and a capacity utilization perspective, we're thinking about the available seats at the school, how well are we using those available seats at the school based on the current assignment areas, and what pressure is on that campus based on those trailers, and can we reduce that complement there. So that's that side of the house. And then the other piece of efficiency is related to transportation efficiency. So trying to make sure we have the most efficient bus routes. And that's calculated in a couple of different ways, but one is ridership. So if I have a bus that has a full set of students on it and a full load of students being carried from neighborhoods to the school, then that's a really efficient route. If we can get that route, down to a certain time, or make sure that it's arriving at school on time, on its designated time, that would also be a factor as well. So the efficiency that we talk about when we're talking about assignment planning is how well are we utilizing our facilities, and how can we reduce pressure on those capped and overcrowded schools? Because I need everyone to understand, when you see the capacity for a school, that's the ideal learning environment where we're maximizing the seats for kindergarten through 5th grade. And all of the programs have their dedicated spaces. So art has a classroom, music has a classroom, special education students have a designated learning space, etc. When we have a cap school situation, quite often we are adding extra students above and beyond that ideal capacity in such a way that we're actually putting undue pressure on those facilities and on the learning environment. So it's possible, you might have heard a term like art on a cart. So sometimes we're becoming really inefficient by overcrowding a school because we're now taking classes and removing them from their optimal learning environment, and maybe having them have to push into classrooms during planning periods, or maybe even, be offered in a non-classroom space, maybe having to convert a conference room in an administrative wing to create a special education space or something. So that operational efficiency can kind of hit on both sides of that, both underutilized and overutilized facilities. We really want our schools between 90 and 100%, and anything above or below that for us would be considered less efficient.
I know we're 1 minute past time, so I'm going to ask one last question and then I will let you wrap up.
Okay.
If our current school is Pleasant Grove and our proposal is to Leesville Road, do we need to contact Leesville and tell them that we're coming?
Excellent question. So what will happen from today is, today it's still just a draft. The board has not approved any of these recommendations yet. When we go to the meeting on October 17th, it will still be a draft, but it'll be a revised draft. So any revisions that we make based on feedback from sessions like today will be included in that, as well as a full, like I said, a full accounting of all of the public engagement and thoughts and concerns and questions that we've received throughout the process. So that'll still be a draft. Then the board will hold a formal public hearing on November 8th. So on November 21st, there should be set to review and approve the final plan. And so if everything goes as scheduled, on the evening of November 21st, the board would officially approve the plan, which I need to recognize is the same week as our Thanksgiving break. So that next Wednesday, our staff will start working on getting all of our systems updated. And then when we get back from Thanksgiving break, we'll start communicating with families to let them know what their new assignment is. Once that happens, then your new school will be expecting you as well. And they have already talked, we've already talked particularly with Leesville, because it's a significant change, about hosting maybe some additional open houses and tours in that sort of December to January timeframe. So we will make sure we give you all of that information and that your principals know that you're coming, because we do want to give you the opportunity to do a stability transfer first, and then we'll start connecting you with your new principals. So it's a long road, but usually around December, we'll know for sure and we'll get you all connected.
Thank you all for joining. I do want to add that we had almost 10 full pages of very small text of questions. So we got through as much as we could.
And so to that point, again, thank you, Coralie, for that. We will continue to look through all of those questions. And if there's any that we missed in today's discussion, we'll make sure we get them adapted and put them on the website in the FAQ portion. Hopefully you noticed that some of the information from the thought exchange already prompted us to put some questions out there based on this reassignment recommendation. I appreciate your willingness to join us on a Tuesday evening. I know that for some of you, this is cutting away from family time, so we do appreciate your willingness to join us. Please encourage friends and family that couldn't join us today to watch the video once it's posted, or to join us for a future session. And then I did mention, if you have a very personal question about your student that's highly confidential and really isn't appropriate for this type of a forum, please feel free to shoot me an email. This is my personal email. I do ask to just use it for this purpose. And then either I or one of my staff members will follow up with you and help you navigate that specific confidential question. Y también, si necesita ayuda en español, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien comunicará con usted mañana.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We wish you all a very good evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.